Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to let you know about tonight's author. S.H. Cooper is a horror and dark fantasy author. He has numerous books and collections available now on Amazon. I'm running a couple images in the background so you can take a look at some of their books that currently are available. All That's Fair, Threads of Ash, The Corpse Garden, The Ungodly Duology, and Inheriting Her Ghosts. If you guys like tonight's story or want to pick up some great new horror books or some dark fantasy books for this Halloween season, I strongly suggest you check them out. You can find more of her books in the description down below. And now, on to tonight's story. Times were different when I was young. It used to be that if the sun was shining, the kids were out, and whatever they got into was between them, their buddies, and their bikes. As long as everybody made it home in one piece without the cops on their tail, there were no questions asked. That October, the one when the rumors started, I was finally old enough to tag along with my big brother when he ventured out with his friends. I knew he didn't really want me there, that he was only letting me go because Mom had told him that he had to, but it didn't matter. I was getting to hang out with Billy and his boys, the coolest guys anywhere ever, in my 9-year-old opinion. They were all older than me, 12 and 13, and they swore and had firecrackers, and sometimes one of them would nab a couple smokes off their parents when they weren't looking. Billy wouldn't let me try any of them, but just standing in the circle while the others took drags made me feel like a real bad boy. It was during one of these sessions when we were all huddled behind the Woolworths, trying to look devil-may-care and inconspicuous at the time, that Mac Barden brought up the carnival. "It's out in the woods, off the old highway," he said after a short pull from the cigarette. Smoke curled in thin tendrils from between his lips with every word. "Bullshit," Billy said, and I couldn't help whispering the word immediately after with nervous glee. I'd never said such a grown-up thing before, and glanced around with some hopefulness to see if anyone had noticed. They were all too focused on Mac, though. "No, it's there," he said with a dismissive scoff. "I heard some kids at the arcade talking about it. First they said they heard rumors about it. It's supposed to come around every few years, around Halloween, something like that. But I've got a first-hand account. My cousin's best friend was cutting through the woods to get to the pond last weekend, and he actually saw it. It looked huge. There were rides, it smelled like cotton candy and peanuts. He talked to the guy running it, the barker or whatever, at the entrance. He said it's open all month, free, just for kids. No adults." It was the kind of rumor only bored kids caught in a small-town lull would pay attention to, and we were buying into it. Hook, line, and sinker. An impressed murmur rippled across the group. A whole carnival with no supervision sounded like utopia. "So how come nobody's heard of it then?" Billy, still skeptical, asked, and I quickly changed my expression to match his doubtful one. "'Cause it's a secret, shit for brains," Max said. "It's like only certain people can go to it. You gotta know about it. Otherwise, all the parents would be there too." "So we know about it. Can we go to it?" Kirk Blatz, Billy's best friend and biggest kid in the whole 8th grade, swiped the cigarettes from Mac and eyed him with a raised brow. It was a brat pack kind of expression he'd been trying to perfect for ages, but I still thought it made him look more confused than anything else. "We just gotta find it first," Mac replied. "There's a big carnival in the woods. How hard could it be?" Billy said. Talk of the carnival and how we'd find it went on for the rest of the week, sidelining any Halloween plans that had previously been the priority. Maps were examined, and we hung out at the arcade and mall trying to overhear any more conversations about it from the other kids. We were careful not to let our parents in on the planning. We were taking the no adults rule very seriously. Robert bowed out first. His mom smelled smoke on him when he got home one night and grounded him for the next month. And then Jerry remembered he had a family thing to go to, so when the scheduled morning actually arrived for us to bike out to the woods, only Billy, Mac, Kirk, and me were left. And my place in the group was shaky at best. Noah's not going to be able to keep up, Mac griped. I will, I promised earnestly. I looked to Billy for support. It stung a bit that he didn't immediately jump to my defense. He frowned, obviously weighing his limited options, and finally shrugged. He can ride on my handlebars. Come on, man, Mac said. We have more fun without him. Mom said I have to let him come when he wants. That's bull... Mac started to complain again, but Kirk punched him soundly in the shoulder. Quit bitching, let's go, he said. I'd never been so grateful for the big lug in all my life. I perched myself on Billy's handlebars with a wide grin and held on tight as we lurched out of our driveway. We rode out of the neighborhood, straight down Main Street, past all the mom-and-pop shops decorated with carved pumpkins and paper cutout skeletons that weren't open yet, and across the wooden footbridge to the old highway. The road was uneven, with deep, wide potholes that the other two made a game of jumping over, while Billy swerved more carefully around them, struggling to keep us upright. He just grumbled at me to shut up. Kirk skid off the pavement first and swept down the embankment, followed closely by Mac, and then, at a more cautious pace, me and Billy. The bikes had to be abandoned shortly after we crossed into the tree line. There was no good path, and it was quickly decided that we'd be better off hoofing it. I stuck close to Billy as we delved deeper into the woods, equal parts nervous and excited, and while the guys talked about all the treats they were going to eat and the rides they'd go on, I just focused on keeping up, determined to prove Mac wrong. A thin fog hung low between the trees, trapping the damp chill from the night before. We wandered aimlessly, unsure of where exactly we were going, but certain that we were going to take as long as we needed to find it. The morning dragged into early afternoon. I'd started to lag behind the others. My mouth was dry, my legs were tired from kicking through underbrush and bushes, and my clothes were clinging with sweat despite the autumn cool. It was Mac who was doing all the whining, though. I'm thirsty. My feet hurt. How much further? It was hard not to feel smugly superior to him after all the moaning he'd done about me earlier in the day. At least I could keep my mouth shut about how miserable I was. His long string of complaints earned him some sharp remarks from Billy and Kirk, and the three of them started bickering back and forth until I shouted at them to be quiet. Mac was the first to whirl around, ready to lay into me, but my wide-eyed smile stopped him short. Do you smell that? I asked. They all paused and sniffed the air. One by one, their faces lit up. Cotton candy, Billy said. Where's it coming from? Kirk tilted his head up like he might give a better sense of where the smells were coming from. Like a pack of hunting dogs, we followed those enticing scents through the trees. They were sweet and warm and thick, the kind of smells that only come from one kind of place, a carnival. When we heard the music, distinctly cheerful and tinny, we knew we were going the right way, and we started to walk faster and faster until we were running, all of our previous aches and pains forgotten so close to the promised land. The woods thinned around us until we spilled into a large clearing, directly beneath a banner featuring a painted-on smiling man in a top hat and large blocky letters. Welcome. We'd arrived. Beyond the banner, we could see the tips of rides poking out from over a wooden fence, the tops of brightly colored tents, a large, ghoulish face leading to a haunted house, and there was music and the smells. It was heavenly. There was no other word for it. And waiting to greet us, standing tall atop an overturned bucket, was the same man who'd been on the banner, the barker. He plucked his top hat off of his head and waved us over with it, smiling broadly beneath a thin mustache. Oh, welcome, welcome to the Harvest Carnival, he said, hopping down to greet each of us with a shake of the hand. Why, you're the first ones here, lucky you. You'll have the whole place to yourself. We cheered and whooped as the barker told us to follow him to the ticket booth, where he handed us each 5 tickets. These can be used freely on any ride, on any game, but once they're gone, there's a price to pay, he said with a wag of his long finger. Ah, man, Mac groaned. We were told it wouldn't cost a cent. And so it won't, my boy, and so it won't. But you said don't worry yourself about that, just be mindful of your tickets, and go enjoy the carnival. That was good enough for us. The barker ushered us to the gate, and we were off, each of our 5 little blue tickets clutched tight in our fists. It was empty inside, both of workers and of other children, but the lights were on, the music was playing, and the popcorn popping, and for a moment, we were the luckiest kids alive. Kirk ran for the shooting gallery where little wooden ducks with targets on their sides were sitting in front of mounted BB guns. He fed a ticket into a slot on the booth, and the 2 rows of ducks started churning to life, going back and forth while Kirk took aim. He missed his first 2 shots, but the third hit its mark, and the unfortunate duck folded down. A siren went off. The string of lights around the backdrop flashed, and the barker appeared, stepping out from behind the booth to reward Kirk with a lollipop. None of us wondered how he'd gotten back there from the gate without any of us noticing. We went from booth to booth, each taking turns at the ones that interested us. I spent 2 tickets trying my hand at ring toss. Billy knocked over milk bottles. Mac popped balloons with darts. Each of us tried the strength test, and every time the lights flashed and the sirens sounded, the barker would be there with a treat for the victor. The tilt-a-whirl was next, and then we were rushing towards the small Ferris wheel and its half-dozen seats that would lift us just high enough to see over the tents. I can't say if Mac really meant to trip me or if we just collided with one another and I ended up going down, but just before we reached the ride, I found myself flat on my back and seeing stars after smacking my head against the ground. He barely paused to glance down at me, laughed once, and then shoved his ticket into the slot and got into one of the slow-moving buckets after Kirk. Billy shouted a nasty cuss after him and crouched beside me. "You okay?" he asked, probably more worried he'd get in trouble if I was hurt than he was about me. "I think so," I said. I sat up, gingerly touching a hand to the back of my head. I was scowling down at the ground, trying not to cry like a big fat baby, when I heard this terrible creaking. The squeal and the protests of old metal seemed louder still, now that the music had become fainter, more disjointed, like a cassette tape about to tangle. Looking up, I realized right away where the sound was coming from. The Ferris wheel, which had only a moment before been gleaming steel and rotating slowly, was little more than a rusted, still skeleton of its former self, and sitting in 2 of the unmoving and warped buckets were Kirk and Mac, laughing and pointing like they thought they were high overhead instead of still at ground level. The creaking sounded again every time they shifted their weight. Billy was still asking if I was okay, unfazed by any of it. What happened to the ride?" I looked to my brother in confusion, and he returned my stare, equally baffled. "Huh? The ride, it's all wrong, it's old, it's not moving." I pointed at it, desperate for him to realize that something wasn't right. But when he looked over his shoulder, his expression didn't change. By then, the others were hopping out of the buckets and heading over to us. "What's with him?" Kirk nodded down at me. "He tripped," Billy said. I wasn't even bothered that wasn't what had happened at all. I was too busy looking around at the carnival. There were no lights, no music except that ghostly off-key melody coming from somewhere in the distance. Even the smell had gone, replaced by that of mildew and rotting wood. I leapt to my feet, turning in circles and only growing more upset, more frightened, when I saw the state of things. Tents were dirtied and torn. The rides were run down, unusable. The stalls that had been food and sweets were empty except for dead leaves. The ghoulish face of the haunted house was sagging, one eyelid drooping, its mouth fallen open like a corpse from one of Billy's horror movies. All the brightness and good cheer had been washed away by age and decay, and still the others were walking towards the spinning swings. "This is my last ticket," Mac said. "Mine too." Kirk held up his. "I've got 2 more, Billy gloated. "It doesn't matter. He said we could still do stuff after we use them all," Mac was quick to remind them. I tried to call after them to tell them that the swings they were about to climb onto were just cracked plastic on dangerously groaning chains, but I couldn't find my voice. And they sat on the broken down ride, their hands raised over their heads, hollering and carrying on as if they were swooping around high up in the air. The barker was standing opposite me on the opposite side. And instead of the tall, slender man with the thin mustache from before, he was crooked, hollow, his skin tinged gray beneath his threadbare red coat and collapsed top hat. When he saw me staring, he pressed his pale lips together in a sinister, pleasured grin. I was still screaming when the guys got off the swing a few minutes later. God, what's his issue? Maybe he needs a nap. Kirk laughed at his own joke. Stop being assholes, Billy snapped, and then turned to me and said, What's your deal? I want to go. Something's wrong. I tugged his arm, pleading, and he shot me a look of derision that normally would have turned my stomach. Now I just wanted to get out of there. I got one ticket left. I'm going to use it. Billy, please! While we argued, Mac and Kirk had become distracted by the carousel at the center of the carnival. I remembered seeing it when we first came in. Finely painted creatures, both real and fantasy, threaded with shining brass poles, dancing up and down, invitingly as they circled round and round. Now they were chipped and broken, their colors faded, their poles tarnished, and it was clear their dancing days were long behind them. That didn't stop the pair from bypassing the ticket slot and climbing on their chosen steeds. Mac on a white leopard with only 3 legs, and Kirk on a horse that looked like it had half its head smashed, leaving a jagged, splintery crater on one side where the ear and eye should have been. You sure we don't need a ticket for this? Kirk asked, uncertain, even as he swung his leg over the horse's back. The ride's still going, so who cares? Mac replied dismissively. Hey, Billy, get your ass up here. There's a little pink unicorn with your name on it. My brother flipped him off, but told me to stay put and moved to join them. Billy, I want to go, I whispered again, clutching the back of his shirt. Noah, he said warningly. Please. I continued to hold tight, afraid to be alone, even more afraid of letting my brother go onto that decrepit ride. Get off, man. We're not done yet. He yanked himself away and started towards the carousel, and a surge of panic propelled me forward. I had hit my head, and it made everything change for me. I can only hope the same would be true for Billy. I didn't give myself time to stop and think of what might happen if I was wrong, or the world of pain I'd be in when he was done with me. I just swung my fist as hard as I could at the back of my big brother's head. It connected with a crack, and he stumbled to his knees with a surprised, pained cry. You little shit! He shouted, grabbing his head. He started to push himself up, and I shuffled back a few steps, my eyes going from him to the carousel, where Mac and Kirk seemed to think they were riding in a circle. And then back to him again. He whirled on me, his own fist raised to return my blow. Then he froze, his mouth falling open. What happened? His voice was soft, mystified, afraid. And I grabbed at his arm again, tugging him towards the exit. You see it now too, right? We gotta go. But the guys... Billy, still in a daze, glanced over his shoulder as Mac called his name again. Hey, where are you two going? He cupped his hands around his mouth and twisted on the leopard, as if the ride were taking him away from us, around to the other side, and he was about to lose sight of us. Mac, Kirk, you gotta get off there. We gotta go now. Billy's voice cracked with agitation, and instead of heeding his words, the other guys laughed at him. Guys! His warning was followed by another crack, but this wasn't from him. It was the sharp wooden snap, then another, and the leopard that Mac was riding was suddenly facing him, its head having rotated completely around. The snarl it released was heard by all of us. Mac shrieked, Kirk swore. We saw that his horse with its half face had done the same as the leopard. They tugged at the safety belts around their waist, shouting for us to help them, and we did We did start running towards them. We wanted to get them off the ride, but the gate at the entryway slammed shut in front of us. Billy grabbed the back of my shirt and hauled me back again. From the carousel, there was another snarl, another snap. And the guys were howling. The creatures, the horse and the leopard, had opened their mouths, revealing row upon row of all too real-looking teeth. And they sank those fangs into Mac and Kirk's forearms. Kirk struggled, yanking and kicking and shouting at the top of his lungs, but even with his size and brute strength, the horse's jaws remained firmly shut. Mac could only scream. There was a long, agonized groan of gears and wood, and slowly, the carousel started to turn. Mac and Kirk yelled for us again, begging us to get them off, and I looked to Billy for guidance. He had gone ghostly pale, his lower lip quivering. When I touched his hand, he jumped. "I'm scared, Billy," I cried. The others rounded the carousel, disappearing from view, but we still heard them screaming. 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 When they reappeared a moment later, their arms had vanished up to their elbows, down the throats of their mouths. The barker was standing between them, smiling, delighted. "Join us, my boys," he said, throwing his bony arms wide. "There's plenty of room for everyone." "Go, go, go, go!" Billy held me by the wrist and was pulling me away. My legs didn't want to work. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the barker, who didn't even try to stop us. "Do come back soon, my boys," he shouted over the piercing, anguished screams of our friends. "We'll be here. We'll be waiting. And we're always hungry. As long as there are children, there will be the Harvest Carnival." Billy half carried me the rest of the way back to the bikes. He didn't look back, he didn't slow. He just kept moving, and he made sure that I was with him every step of the way. When we reached the embankment, he shoved me ahead of him, telling me to go, that he'd be right behind me. I sobbed, and I begged him to stay right next to me, but he had to get his bike. It was an impossibly long climb back to the highway, and every few seconds I had to look back to make sure Billy was still right behind me. Once we reached the top, we scrambled onto the bike, him in the seat, me on the handlebars, and he pedaled as fast and as hard as he could back to town. Mac Barden and Kirk Blatz were never seen again. When the woods were searched, they did find the remnants of a carnival. Nothing but broken down rides and empty, half-rotted booths and stands. They combed through it with careful precision, going through every structure, but there was no trace of Mac, Kirk, or any Barker. It hasn't been used in decades, we were told. It's abandoned. There's nothing out there. It's more graveyard than carnival. The cops weren't wrong about that. It was a graveyard for Mac and Kirk and all the other kids who had chased rumors of a secret carnival in the woods. We tried to tell them that it needed to be destroyed, but that never happened. It was too much work, too much red tape. And eventually, the disappearances of our friends were forgotten. And the carnival remained. Not that I really thought removing the items would remove him. The Barker. He was darkness. An infection that came with Halloween. I had felt it even as a child. All we could do was warn as many people to stay away as we could. Things were quiet for a time, peaceful even. But about 15 years later, when a little girl went missing near those woods towards the end of a particularly cold October, Billy and I just looked at each other, and we felt the same sick certainty. It was active again. It was back. Because as long as there are children, there will be a harvest carnival. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I know I haven't had as many updates as I would like to have on the channel lately, and things just kind of get really hard with shit that's happening in my family. But hey, I wanted to say thank you so much for being around, thank you so much for still supporting me and for coming back to listen to new stories. If you guys want to get updates anytime that I do upload, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Or if you're listening over a podcast, I think it's still a subscribe button or a follow button or whatever happen. Those happen to be. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody out there on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. A very, very big thank you to everybody there, and to especially Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, King Crab, Calcifer420, Veronica Lynn Lopez, Marlon Chavez, Azazel66603, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Blake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Samara Lynn, Disciple, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, LaQueda, Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jed's Pet, Clonable, J Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Remember the Sun, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Voice of Sand, Ficomel, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Tommy Walters, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Tristan Pelton, Ball Arms the Rat, The Ginger Bros, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. To all of you guys there, everybody who's down in the description, and everybody who can just give $1, I want to say thank you to you guys. And if you would like to join this list in the description, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepy. And if you would like to join this list in the description, sweet dreams.